And so when I started doing that and looking at the photos, it was like I didn't like them at first. And then I would be like, no, I'm going to prove to myself that I don't have to change. This is a part of my self-love journey. And so I started posting these photos that at the start I may not have liked, but then started posting them, and then that just went away. And I was like, wow, like I actually like this photo now. Like I like my rolls, I like my cellulite. And it kind of just continued, like me putting myself out of my comfort zone and expanding that like self-love that I had for myself. I also like unfollowed people that, you know, maybe didn't make me feel great about my own body. But I think the main thing was like, yeah, putting myself out there and taking photos and really appreciating my body for what it actually does for me and not just what it looks like on the outside.
Hello, beautiful people. On today's podcast, we have the wonderful Ariella Nyssa. Ariella is on a mission to challenge mainstream perceptions of beauty. At the age of 18, Ariella, after growing up in a strict church community, having been married and divorced, found herself traumatized and suffering from body dysmorphia. It wasn't until she connected with a supportive community on Instagram that a whole new world opened up for her. Now, inspiring more than 700,000 followers with her message of body confidence and self-love. She is the author of the new book, Self-Love Bible, which is all about understanding, loving, and celebrating the most important person in your life, you. What I personally love about this conversation is the energy and purpose behind it. Ariella is all about the message of being beautiful, no matter your mistakes, no matter society's expectations of appearance. It's all about appreciating your body for what it does for you, not just what it looks like. Life to Ariella is all about learning. It's all about growing. Life is all about the journey to self-love. Please enjoy this conversation with the beautiful Ariella. Welcome, Ariella.
Thank you. Thanks for having me.
You're very welcome. So where I'd love to start, Ariella, is with your new book, Self-Love Bible.
Very exciting.
I'm about to tell you my story, a story that I didn't plan on, and a story that nearly took my life. A story of my transition from a child full of love to a young adult lost and petrified of living, and finally to someone embracing who I am and not afraid to put myself out into a world that might reject me. So where I wanted to start is this story that you speak of, that you say you didn't plan on, and a story that nearly took your life. Could you please share more on that?
Yeah, of course. So it's been probably about 6 years since this transition kind of began for me. But I remember like growing up in high school, and, you know, I constantly wanted to change something about myself. I mean, when you're a teenager, you kind of go through the motions of that. Like you're coming into your body, it's a new body. You know, there's boys, there's new friends, like you're going to parties on the weekend and socializing. And I guess that's kind of where the journey really began, was when I was like a teenager, and I had grown up in a really religious family. I'd gone to church every Sunday, you know, since I was born. My parents were in a Bible study. We were very involved in church. So my whole life revolved around that. Like, even I remember my friends kind of like making fun of me in high school because I was kind of living this double life. Like I wanted to do what they were doing, but then I was like, oh no, I can't do that because I'm a Christian, and you know, the Bible says this and the Bible says that. And they always used to question me on it. But, you know, when you're a kid, like, and that's what you've been taught, that's obviously, you know, what you believe. And I was like, nope, that's what I believe. That's what I've been taught. That's the truth. And I didn't really venture out of that. And so when I was 17, I remember going to this youth camp. My mum and dad used to always send me. Actually, I think I was 16. And that's when I really became involved. So it wasn't just like my family was religious anymore. It was like, no, I'm taking the stand. Like I got rebaptized. I was in my own Bible study. I was a youth leader. I sang in the band on Sundays. I was going to both services. Like my whole life revolved
Wow.
around church at this point. It was like a big shift for me. And so I remember like in these Bible studies, there was girls who were all my age, and we used to like pray for our future husbands. And it was always this like husband talk, like, you know, you need a godly man to lead you, and what qualities do you want in, you know, your future husband. And I guess like my naive, ignorant mind thought like, okay, well, I need to get married. Like that's, you know, I need to get married young. I need to save myself to a marriage. And when I was 17, I met this really lovely boy, and he was from a Christian family, and we dated for like a year or a year and a half. And when I was 18, I got engaged. So it was a really quick engagement. It was 6 months. We got married. I remember on the wedding day, I was petrified. Like I did not want to walk down the aisle. Like my legs were shaking. It felt like my legs wanted to like run away. But my mind was like, oh no, everyone's here. You've paid for it. Like it needs to happen. You're going to let everyone down. And so I went through with it. And maybe like 2 months into the marriage, I started uni, and that kind of opened up another, you know, group of people living a different life. And I started to like question it, and I was like, hang on a sec, like I've never questioned this. I've just kind of done it. And me and him weren't really clicking either, living together. There wasn't that, you know, passionate, true love that I'd always dreamed of, like when I was a little girl. And so I made the decision after going to therapy to end the marriage and move back into my parents' house. And this was like not taken lightly by the whole community. I come from quite a small town, and like it was the talk of the town. And I was only 19. Like before this, nothing like this had ever happened to me. Like everything was pretty easy breezy. And now I was like the laughing stock, I guess, of my hometown. And I had people calling me, abusing me, saying like God hates me. You're so embarrassing. All these rumors were spread around, and it felt like my whole life just like crashed around me. Like I lost all my friends. Believe it or not, I had 7 bridesmaids.
Wow.
And one of them still talked to me and was like, it's okay, I support you. The rest of them were like, nah, we don't want anything to do with you. So these people that I had grown up with essentially just left. I felt like I had no one there. Like I only had a handful of people that were there for me. And I went into like a really deep depression because it was like I was walking on the street and people were yelling things out their window. My brother would go out and people would say, oh, your sister's a bitch. I don't know if I can swear on here, but
it's fine.
yeah, just and people who didn't even know me like were coming up to my brother and saying this, saying, oh, your sister's the bitch, she's done this and that. And so I went into a really dark place. I didn't want to leave the house. I started just, I guess, binging and self-sabotaging and not looking after myself. Like I went weeks without drinking water, wouldn't even go out of the house. Yeah, just like eating junk food all the time just to make myself feel a little bit better. And I actually write about it in the book, but there was one defining moment for me where it just got too much. And my parents were overseas. I was in the house by myself. And I bought 2 bottles of wine. And I'm not a smoker. I've never been a smoker. And I went down to the shop and I bought a pack of cigarettes. And I came home and I sat in the lounge room. Sorry, Mum and Dad, because they don't know that. I sat in the lounge room and I was just smoking these cigarettes and drinking these 2 bottles of wine, like sculling them and just crying. And I was a bit, I was drunk and I wasn't in my right like headspace, and I was really upset, and I like got in the bath and I was ready to take my own life. And there was this little voice in my head that was like, this isn't going to last forever. You're worthy. You're enough. These people don't matter. They don't know the real you. They don't know your intentions. You can do this. And I got up out of the bath. went to sleep, and when I woke up in the morning, I was like, you know what, I can do this, I can get through this. And that's kind of when I started my, I guess you could call it like self-love journey. And like I was like, I want to look after myself. I don't want to feel like this anymore. I also don't want to be like a people pleaser. Like I want to live for me and do what makes me happy. And that's what I did from that day forward. I started posting on Instagram like these photos of just me and these captions that were lifting myself up. It was almost like a journal to myself, like give gratitude, remember the small things, your body is beautiful, like you are beautiful regardless of the mistakes you've made. And then my Instagram blew up, and then that's kind of taken me on that journey now.
Absolutely.
Yeah,
thank you for sharing. It's so powerful and so beautiful, and thank you for being so raw and honest in that. There's so many things I want to touch on. I know that you speak about relationships, and obviously this particular time in your life, relationships are at the forefront of everything that you're experiencing, whether it be with your husband at the time or ex-husband and the community around you. What have you learned about knowing when to actually like nurture a relationship and knowing when to actually let it go?
I'm like the kind of person who like always sees the best in people, or tries to. And I always like take stuff on to myself instead. And I'm like, oh, what's wrong with me? And for so long I did that. And it's only been maybe until like the last year that I've really started setting healthy boundaries for myself. Because like, especially with friendships, and like family and people you've been really close with for a long time, like you have so many memories with that person. You have so much history that when something goes wrong, or when they're not treating you right, you're kind of like, oh, I'll keep giving them the benefit of the doubt. I'll keep giving them the benefit of the doubt. But what that does is like internally for yourself, it's bringing on their insecurities and their projections, and ultimately making you feel lousier about yourself. And so I feel like throughout the last years, I've really learned that like the friendships that you have that are really strong, yes, you've got to work on them. But if they're treating you like crap and there's no boundaries there, and you try to set boundaries and they're not respecting them, then it's probably better to leave that relationship in the past. And it sounds so scary, but I've done that so much over the years now that if I hadn't done that, it wouldn't have opened up doors for these new amazing relationships with people that like bring me up and make me feel good and make me feel like I can be my authentic and genuine self.
And you've spoken about people pleasing, and I actually wrote down something that you shared in your book about this, and you said, I had people pleased for so long that no longer I recognize myself, my values, or who I was deep down. Can you sort of like share more about your journey in that? Because I feel like most of us can really resonate with that sort of loss of self and just listening to everybody around us and sort of taking on those negative comments that are shared with us, particularly, you know, you're on social media. It's right out there in that world. How have you sort of really learned to integrate this part of you of being able to sort of set those boundaries and no longer feel like it's your responsibility to make everyone around you happy, or, you know, whatever it is, that positive emotion that they're seeking?
Yeah, I think like I love to pride myself in like being kind to everyone. That's something that I've always really respected about myself and loved about myself. But there comes a point in time where like if someone is trying to bring you down intentionally, even in relationships and stuff like that, if you're not feeling that that relationship is right for you, like I did with my marriage, you know, like staying in that, yeah, it might have been the easy way out in everyone else's eyes, just staying and staying in that relationship and just trying. But for me, I knew deep down that that's not what I wanted. And if I didn't listen to my heart and my gut, I wouldn't be in the place that I'm in today, and it wouldn't have opened up all of these amazing doors. And for me to actually do what I want to do in this life, I think it sounds so cliche, but like I always just say YOLO because like you only live once. And like, I always remember that. I'm like, you only live once. Like, you only have one life to do what you want to do. And if you're going to be restrained by the people around you, you're never going to do what you really, really, truly want to do. And I feel like now with my job and like even the book coming out, I feel like I'm now able to help other people. And I wouldn't have been able to do that if I stayed and did what everyone else wanted me to do. I remember seeing my therapist just before we got a divorce, like just before we split. We're actually supposed to go on this trip overseas together. And I was just dreading it because I wasn't feeling in it. I felt like my head was all over the place. I was confused and I was questioning it all. And I said to my therapist, like, I just really don't want to go, but I have to. And she was like, why do you have to? And I was like, because like, you know, everyone will say this and everyone will think that and people will be angry at me. And she was like, you know, you can say no. Like, you don't have to be a yes man all the time. You can say no. And like, that was so hard for me to say no. I remember like building up the courage to be like, I can't go on this trip. It doesn't matter what anyone else says. This is about me and my holistic health. And that was like the first time in my life I truly said no, which is like scary to think because I was like, you know, 19 and all my life I just said yes to people and it had made me feel like I wasn't living and being truly myself and setting those boundaries. And it was really hard, but now I'm at a place where I'm like, no, you only live once, you do you. And like whoever stays in your life is meant to be in your life and whoever leaves, that's meant to happen. We can learn from those things as well.
And what has that journey been like for you? Because I completely resonate with this. I've been a people pleaser and it's pretty fresh for me as well to be able to sort of say no to people. And throughout my experience, it's just been so incredibly freeing. And when you're on the other side of it, like, you know, it sounds silly when you're on the other side of it, but you realize that like your world doesn't crumble like around you. Like everything's fine. Maybe some people may leave your life, but as you're suggesting, like those are the ones that probably shouldn't be there anyway. And you kind of come into this sense of like self-empowerment that, you know, for most of our lives we haven't experienced. And yeah, as I sort of shared, it was a real like deep feeling of freedom to me. What did it feel like to you?
Yeah, ultimately, like in that moment, I felt so free. Like there was a weight lifted off my shoulders, like that first no. And even now, like I still get really scared with conflict, but I'm learning that conflict is good and it's healthy to have conflict. But in that moment, it was so freeing. And like you said, like it's not the end of the world and it may feel like that at times when you do lose people that are close to you or things don't go as, you know, you had kind of perceived. But like looking back now in hindsight, I'm like the happiest I've ever been. I'm living being my authentic self. I've got an amazing relationship, an amazing family, amazing friends, amazing career. Like it just opens up so many more doors for you when you stand firm in who you are and what you want out of life. Because you don't want to get to, you know, like your 50s and 60s or even older and look back and be like, I have so many regrets like of the things that I didn't do or the things I didn't say. So I feel like as long as you're approaching things healthily and always working on yourself, then everything works out for the best anyway.
Yeah, I love that you mentioned conflict because I'm exactly the same, like in that sense of like, okay, there's one thing to be able to say no to something like, you know, going out for lunch or something, but like obviously there's a spectrum and there's levels of like having boundaries and saying no, and sometimes it can sort of get more intense. And definitely throughout my journey, what I've realized is like your body may react as if you're about to die in that moment. But when you actually kind of like be really present in the moment and actually look around you, like to the truth and reality of the situation you're in, I feel like it really helps. And as you suggested, like all of this is a work in progress. We can have the awareness and the realization of what's good for us, but it doesn't necessarily mean overnight a pattern that we've had for most of our lives is just going to disappear. And I think that's also that element, as you said, of like the element of like self-compassion and kindness for not only ourselves, but the people around us, and the human, like humanizing the situation, that I think really helps. And I know that you're sort of renowned as a body positive advocate. I'd love to sort of learn, because obviously, you know, your story has just got so much beautiful self-development in it. I would love to learn more about your experience with body dysmorphia, because I know that that was another pretty big experience for you, and certainly a big driver for the trajectory that you have been on and continue to go on. Can you share more about your experience and sort of in the now where you are in terms of like body positivity, acceptance, and celebration?
Yeah, look, I think women especially, and I write about it in the book too, like have it really hard when it comes to how we look on the outside, and even like things on the inside as well. But, you know, when I was young, all the magazine covers, if a celebrity put on weight, it was like shaming her for putting on weight. If her cellulite was out at the beach, it was like disgusting cellulite. Like it was constantly negative terminology when it came to a woman's body. And so when I remember in year 6, I asked my mom if she could pack me some lettuce for school. And she was like, lettuce? And I was like, yeah, just some extra, you know, like I just really feel like lettuce. And it's because I had learned, I forget where I saw it, maybe in a magazine or something, or someone told me that lettuce had no calories, that it was mainly water. So when I got to school, I threw the rest of my lunch in the bin and I sat there and I was eating this lettuce. And my friend asked me, oh, why are you just eating lettuce? And I was like, oh, because I'm trying to lose weight. And this is when I'm like 12. And, you know, I always had a bit of like, I guess, a chubbier body, if you want to call it. I always had curves. My boobs came in really young, and all my other friends were kind of like stick thin girls. And so I instantly saw myself as not okay, that I wasn't enough, that I need to change my body. And I remember she went and told her mum, who was a teacher at the school, that I was eating lettuce because I was trying to starve myself and lose weight. And she called my mum and told my mum. And then, you know, my mum had a big chat with me. And then it kind of developed into my teenage years, when I started being able to go on social media, talking to people, and I was constantly on a diet. Like I would be constantly looking up these different diets to go on. And whenever I would go out, I wouldn't like how my body looked. And that still goes up to like this day now. Even though I post what I post, I still have days where I'm like, oh, maybe I need to lose weight, or maybe I need to do this to feel better about myself, or for people to like me more. And I think when I like started posting on Instagram, it was the first time I'd ever really set out to take photos of myself, like because I was, you know, Christian, and they kind of saw that as vanity. I would never really like take heaps of selfies or like go out and get someone to take photos of me at the beach or whatever. And so when I started doing that and looking at the photos, it was like I didn't like them at first, and then I would be like, no, I'm going to prove to myself that I don't have to change. This is part of my self-love journey. And so I started posting these photos that at the start I may not have liked, but then started posting them, and then that just went away. And I was like, wow, like I actually like this photo now. Like I like my rolls, I like my cellulite. And it kind of just continued, like me putting myself out of my comfort zone and expanding that like self-love that I had for myself. I also like unfollowed people that, you know, maybe didn't make me feel great about my own body. But I think the main thing was like, yeah, putting myself out there and taking photos and really appreciating my body for what it actually does for me, and not just what it looks like on the outside.
I absolutely love it. And I feel like it's so courageous to be able to do that, because I guess there's one element that you're speaking to, which is like our own sort of self-criticism that we can have, and in overcoming that. But then there's kind of like a second wall that when you're posting these photos on social media, there are people that come into this sort of public space, and not all of them are sort of seeing or have the same beliefs as you. A lot of them still have sort of this self-criticism that then they project onto you. How do you deal with that? Because I'm sure that's been quite the journey for you as well, to sort of like come into this element of self-love and practice, but then have to also practice being able to have other people's judgments come towards you.
Yeah, it's been a roller coaster.
Yeah.
That's for sure. I have my moments, and especially at the start, like it was, you know, I remember there was a few articles that were written about me, and I looked in the comments, which if an article is ever written about you
don't do
in a newspaper or anything, don't do it, because it's the worst kinds of people in those comments, like saying the meanest stuff. And like at the start, I used to cry all the time, and my boyfriend kind of said to me, like, if you want to do this, you need to stop it. Like you need to only focus on the positive, how you're feeling. Like they don't know you. They've never even seen you in person. They don't know your health. They don't know, you know, what you're eating. They don't know your life at all. So you can't let them have this effect on you. Otherwise, don't do this. Don't do this job. And I was like, okay, that's the wake-up call I needed. I need to focus on the positive and focus on helping people and not focus on the people that are projecting.
Beautiful.
And I've realized now too, like I feel really sorry for them. And before I used to let them in and take that onto myself, like I always used to. And when I feel sorry for them, it makes me feel like I want to keep going, because I'm like, if I keep posting this, maybe one day it'll click for them and their insecurities, and they'll be able to, you know, love themselves more. And like, no matter what you post, there's going to be people out there that talk negatively about you. And so if they're talking negatively about my body and they've never seen it and they don't know anything, then that's okay with me. But yeah, definitely a roller coaster.
Yeah, it really is. And I think, you know, that's with everything, isn't it? It's like we have our good days and our not so good days. And, you know, some days we feel like we're absolutely invincible and there's so much self-love and acceptance, and we just want to share that with the world and be a mentor for others. And then some days you just get a comment that just hits at the wrong time, and you're kind of like, okay, today's going to be a tougher day in this mission. But to understand that it ebbs and flows and to stay the course. And you reminded me of a metaphor that I just love that Brené Brown shares. And, you know, she talks about like being in the arena, which I would visualize yourself as like, you know, you're out in the arena of like body positivity and showing people what self-love looks like. And she sort of talks about there will always be people sort of in the cheap seats that are always kind of there judging you. And it's not an element of like, if there is, it's like there is, and that you have to be able to accept that. And something that's like really helped me in putting myself out there is like, she sort of talks about like, you know, don't be interested in anyone else's feedback other than the people that are also in the arena with you. And I just felt like that was really beautiful.
Yeah, I love that.
Yeah, it's really it's quite impactful, because it just kind of like allows you to like sit different people in different areas and be like, okay, by default there will be these different aspects of people, but the people that are, you know, being authentic and putting themselves forward and being courageous even in the off days are the people that, you know, maybe are more worthy of being listened to, which I think is really amazing.
No, I love that.
I know that because, you know, we talk about self-love, and I kind of want to delve a little bit deeper with you on this, because even in your book, like there's a sentence that basically just says like, you know, self-love is like easy to understand, but it's like, it doesn't mean that it's easy to implement, right? Like self-love.
Sorry.
She's got a beautiful dog Lola behind her.
They're both in here now.
Oh.
Do you guys want to get out because you're being too noisy? Come on, out you get. Sorry.
That's okay.
Out you get. Go on.
Sorry. So yeah, that's okay. So yeah, I feel like self-love can be like a fairly easy concept to understand, but not an easy concept to actually integrate. It can be quite hard. Can you share more about like what specifically self-love looks like to you in your daily life?
Yeah. So I always say to people, like, self-love is hard. Like, it's hard. It's not just like drawing yourself a bubble bath. I mean, that's can be a part of it, but it goes so much deeper. And that's what I really wanted to convey in my book was like, it's not just about you looking in the mirror and liking physically what you see. It's about your childhood. It's about your mindset. It's about, you know, spirituality. It's health is like so holistic and there's so much to it. And I guess that's what I've learned through my journey and the divorce and everything is like, yes, I started to like myself in the mirror when I started posting photos, but I didn't like myself internally. And that would be conveyed through how I would act in social situations, or maybe when I had a drink or too much to drink, or just conflict with someone. Like it's always coming out in different ways in your life. And that's what I wanted to convey in this book. And that's why there's all these different chapters about, you know, make over your mindset, your physical body, your emotional awareness, your even social awareness. Because it goes so much deeper. And like I've put activities in there that I've done myself to always try and be the best possible version of myself, if that makes sense. And I feel like that's what self-love to me is like always working, always growing, always learning, and not being hard on yourself in the process. Because that's what life is. Like it's not going to be all rainbows. There's going to be hard times. There's going to be heartbreak. There's going to be losing someone that you love. There's going to be so many different things that, you know, you want to be your best self to deal with these things. And, you know, it all comes into play. It's all intertwined.
What is one of your favorite self-love practices and or exercises?
It's hard because there's so many on like all the different scales.
Yeah.
But something that really helped me is learning about the actual human body. Like our body is a biological machine. Like it breathes for us. Like I'm talking right now, I'm not even really thinking about making the sounds of my mouth. It's just coming out. It self-heals. Like our body is incredible. The way that it helps us to live without us even consciously thinking about it is incredible. And doing that research that I did for the book and just in general and learning about the human body is such an amazing activity because you go, hang on a sec, like you step away from like just what it looks like and you go, I'm a miracle. Like there's a 1 in a trillion chance that we are even born, that you were born, that I am born. Like that is a miracle in itself. That we self-heal, that's a miracle. And I think one of my favorite activities in the book is actually going through the human body and naming its functions. So like what our hands can do, what our stomach does for us, what our legs do, what our brains do. Like even our consciousness is so amazing. I think one other one that I really love is shadow work and inner child work. And it's really hard, especially if you've got, you know, trauma from your childhood, but it's something that is so freeing once you do it because there's so much that we hold on to internally. Like, for example, one of my best friends in year 8, I think, she told me that I had cankles. And then I held on to that. I still hold on to it up until this day, that little comment. And I don't think about it often, but it's still there. And when I look at my ankles, sometimes it pops up subconsciously.
Wow.
And I don't think about that, you know, or she said that. It's like, oh, cankles, like just going around in my mind. And there's so much that people have said to us that we internally hold on to that we don't realize we're holding on to. So this exercise is really good for that because it's kind of asking those questions of like, what do I hold on to from my childhood, from even like now, what am I holding on to that is affecting the way that I see myself?
Yeah, absolutely love it. It's funny you brought that up because it was only recently I was having this very conversation with my partner about just like those defining moments that you don't realize are so impactful that you can remember. Particularly, I feel like it goes back to school and it's like, you know, someone says this one thing that's probably like so insignificant, but your brain has just like placed so much importance on that and you've changed how you show up because of just that one comment that some like random person said that probably has nothing to do with your life anymore. It's incredibly fascinating. And I think as you're sharing, being able to sort of go back into the past in that way to become more aware of those things that are still influencing our lives that may not be, fueled by self-love and positivity is really important to be able to sort of bring that self-love into that space and be able to let them go, which kind of brings me into forgiveness. Because in your book, you kind of share about like forgiving yourself can be sort of more important than you having to focus on forgiving others. Can you share more about why that has become so important for you?
Yeah, I think when I went through the divorce and stuff like that, and even before that, like these memories that we hold on to, these core memories, and, they come out in our kind of physical form as well, like how we feel emotions, how we deal with conflict, like it comes out in everything. But when I went through the divorce, and that all being like blamed on me because I was the one that made the decision, I held on to that for so long, and I held on to the words that people said about me. And I used to say to, like, when me and my boyfriend started dating, I used to say, do you think I'm a good person?
Wow.
And I would ask him all the time, just crying, like sobbing, cradling myself, just being like, do you think I'm a good person? I'm not a good person. And he used to be like, I wouldn't be with you if you weren't a good person, Ari. Like, you've got to stop letting these words define you. And so I guess the biggest thing for me in my self-love journey was like forgiving myself for that mistake that I did make, and realizing that any mistake we do make, we can learn from it and grow from it. And it doesn't have to be this thing that halts us and makes us hate ourselves and live our lives, not being our full true self because we're held back by things that we haven't forgiven ourselves for. And that goes the same for like other people as well, like forgiving other people. It's like the holding on to that and holding on to that unforgiveness, the only thing that it's doing is detrimental to you. It's self-sabotage. It's having those negative thoughts about yourself, and especially with other people, like not forgiving other people. Like, yeah, you don't have to let these people back into your life. Like, you can set those boundaries, but you need to forgive those people because the only person that's hurting is yourself.
Right. Mm-hmm. Yeah, I feel like that's one of the most powerful lessons I've certainly learned in my life, is to understand that you don't necessarily forgive other people for them, but you forgive them for yourself.
Yeah, exactly. Yeah. And it's so hard. Sometimes it's so hard, but it's freeing as well. It's super freeing to forgive yourself and forgive others. And there's still so much that I need to work on. Like, and I always say, like, self-love is a journey. And you're going to be in this journey for the rest of your life.
Yeah, I really feel like, these sense of inadequacies and insecurities that we have are like really a default setting in relation to us being wired for survival. And like in my own life, I've just kind of learned it's like we will have these like negative self-talk that pops up, but it's about sort of allowing that and embracing that and loving ourselves anyway, rather than identifying it as ourselves, just allowing it. And it's just been so freeing in that sense of just no longer trying to suppress and sort of like push it away, but just allowing it to flow through. And I think through doing that in my own personal life, it does flow through and it no longer kind of like stacks and has that heaviness that certainly over time does manifest in sort of, health issues or behavioral adaptations. Like as you suggested, drinking, I've been there. I've done the binge drinking thing as well. Like when you don't sort of have that element of being able to process these things, it certainly manifests in that way. So thank you so much, Ariella, for sharing all these beautiful things. Your book is just absolutely gorgeous. It's really aesthetic as well. I feel like it's such an amazing gift book. For anyone out there looking for gifts, I highly recommend your book. And there's so many beautiful exercises as you suggested. And I think throughout it, as you've shared, like it's a process, it's a journey, and just sort of, do what speaks to you in that moment. And that's certainly how you're living your life as well. And yeah, I just want to sort of say thank you just personally as well. I think, people like you truly do make an impact. You're certainly an inspiration. I've certainly been able to reflect a lot on how my self-talk is just through sort of going through some of the stuff that you've done. And so thank you so much for that.
No, thank you. You make me teary.
Well, I think it's important.
So nice.
Well, I think it's important because as you shared, like, what I really love about how you talk is like, yes, you're on your own journey, but there's an element of like higher purpose and contribution that's within what you're doing. And I think people aren't always reminded of that, particularly sort of the bigger you grow on social media and everything. Sometimes the more isolated people can become and they don't get the feedback that maybe they initially did. So it's really important to know that even if you don't hear that all the time, you're certainly making an impact. And I'm so supportive of you and hope that you continue doing what you're doing.
Thank you so much. I honestly, like, when I started, it was just for me. And like, so the fact that I've been able to like reach so many people now and help so many people, like that's why I keep doing what I'm doing. Like, no matter how hard it gets, I'll keep posting what I post, because that is like the best feeling to me, is knowing that I can post what I post or write about what I write about, and if it just helps one person, like, that's made my life.
Well, your life is made, Ariella.
Yeah. Thank you.
So on a final note, I would love to ask you, what does it mean to you to be human?
I think to be human is like to be messy and imperfect and still beautiful. And I'm like learning that so much throughout like my own journey, is like nothing's ever going to be perfect and no one is perfect. And life is messy, and to see the beauty in that, like there's so much beauty around us at all times. And I think that's what makes me human, is that I'm messy and I'm imperfect, but I'm beautiful still. And so is everyone else.